I'll just introduce to you Anya Hart. Anya's been with us for almost 12 months in the department. Her primary role has been around engagement, and she's leading the program around the Community Engagement Charter.
Thanks, Anita, and thanks everybody for coming along today. Sally actually did touch on quite a bit about the Engagement Charter, and that's because it's at the front end of our transition along with the Commission. And she did mention the work of the expert panel, and essentially the Engagement Charter came out of one of the recommendations of the expert panel a few years ago. So there was some key feedback around the fact that the community wanted to be engaged differently in the planning space. The prescriptive approach that we are using currently and that we have been using for a number of years isn't right for today's environment. It's static and it's inflexible. And it's very difficult for it to deal with some of the complex issues that we deal with in the planning system. So hence there was a recommendation that we bring about a charter that provides some structure for us to work within that space. So in February this year we went to national tender to look for an innovative organisation to help us facilitate the drafting of this charter. And as Sally mentioned, we have brought on board Democracy Co, so an SA-based company. I think that's a good story in itself that we went nationally and we've gone with somebody on our own doorstep. They've got a lot of experience in deliberative sort of community consultative processes. They've also got a really strong knowledge on the state government's Better Together program, which was important for us to create those linkages so we're not reinventing the wheel. There's some good work there that we can build on. And as outlined in the Planning and Development Act, it's actually the State Planning Commission that's responsible for establishing and maintaining the charter. So obviously Democracy Co is going to work very closely with the department and with the Commission to develop that draft. So probably for the first time, the Act actually prescribes the need to, sorry, thank you, carried away talking. The Act actually prescribes the requirement to develop a charter. It takes into account, I think that's still, anyway. No, I think that's the previous one. That's okay, I'll just keep talking. It's quite, it's actually not prescriptive about what needs to be in the charter, but it does talk about some key principles that should be included in its development, and it uses language like making sure that we engage early and meaningfully, that there's provision for ongoing opportunities to engage, and it actually uses the term that we provide information in plain English. So obviously the details of the charter are still yet to be seen, and I'll talk a little bit about the methodology on the slide that's already up there, but that's okay. I'll adapt. But it does encourage a system that is less prescriptive, that is performance-based or outcomes-based, which allows for more flexibility and for us to create some fit-for-purpose frameworks to enable us to apply them where they fit best. So the charter will be applied at the front end of planning, which we haven't done before, in the preparation or amendment of the designated instruments as they're referred to. So they're the state planning policies, the regional plans, the Planning and Design Code and design standards. And under the new Act, as Sally did say, and it's an important thing, and no doubt it will generate a lot of conversation in the development of the draft, it doesn't actually apply to the development assessment process. So the methodology that we've been working with Democracy Co on is largely based around 4 sessions held over 2 weekends that will be led by community. We've actually got a panel of about 50 people who have been randomly selected and demographically represent South Australia, so that includes the regions. There was only really one question that they were asked, and that was what sort of exposure they've had to the planning system, right from I've never even heard of it type thing, right through to, you know, potentially I'm working in that space. So across those 4 degrees of involvement, we'll have equal representation. So It's largely the charter will be largely broken down into 4 deliverables. So we'll have the principles that we talked about, which will be developed by that community group. It'll be a high level, it'll be very high level and really sets the expectations around how the public or the community expect to be involved in the planning space. However, we are working within a legislative framework, so it's not a citizens' jury. A lot of people are, because Democracy Co have been involved in that space. We do have a framework that we need to work within. We do have outcomes that we need to deliver. So for that reason, there will also be a decision-making framework which will have important input that will come from practitioners and other important stakeholders that are involved in the planning space, that are a sounding board or providing a reality check to make sure that those principles can be applied in real life situations, and we get the outcomes that we need to satisfy the processes and the legislation that we work within. Importantly, there'll also need to be an evaluation process. It's going to be non-prescriptive, but we're going to need to be able to assess that certain requirements have been met. So that will be an interesting space to work within. We'll need to make sure that it's doing what we're setting out to do, and the regulating body, the Commission, needs to be able to make an assessment as to whether they've met the requirements or not. And then supporting that, which will largely be an ongoing process, which will involve people like yourselves in this room. There'll be a toolkit and then a training and capacity building process that we'll need to follow, and we will be taking input from people at the coalface that are using it to make sure that we pre-arm people and people who have got the tools and the expertise that they need to work within this new regime. There will be opportunities for people to get involved with a group that will work with the panel over 1 or potentially 2 of those 4 sessions as that sort of reality check process. And if you're interested in that, there is some information that's just come out in our latest newsletter. You can check the portal or you can get in touch with me. And as Sally also alluded to, we're also going to be doing some work through the Your Say website, and that will preempt the panel sessions, because we want to actually use the feedback that we get through that process to provide the community group and that practitioner panel that will work with them, so we can provide them with that contribution up front. And also we're going to answer some questions at the table following this, and if everybody's okay with that, it would be really good if we could present that to the group that's working on it as well. Okay, just quickly some timelines. So those practitioner panels will be meeting on the first and last weekends of July. Prior to that, we've got a group of highly experienced practitioners that will set down some frameworks for them to work within. We're also putting together what we're calling a discussion guide that will help provide some baseline information for the panel to consider, including some examples of engagement practices that are working well within the planning space but also outside of the planning space. And then ultimately the charter needs to be approved and delivered by early October. And I'll hand back to Anita. I think we've got some questions.
That's a great summary, thanks.